Welcome back to the Whitmer Cast, a podcast by the John Whitmer Historical Association. We bring you essays, interviews, panel discussions, and broadcasts related to Mormon history and restoration studies. My name is Jason Smith, and I'll be your host for today. In this episode, we bring you an interview with Cheryl Bruno and John Dinger about their recent book, Come Up Hither to Zion, William Marks and the Mormon Concept of Gathering, published by Greg Kofford Books. If you'd like to join JWHA or visit our entire backlog of episodes and journals, go to www.jwha.info. With that out of the way, let's get started. Today I'm joined by Cheryl Bruno and John Dinger, authors of the new book about William Marks titled Come Up Hither to Zion, William Marks and the Mormon Concept of Gathering. Cheryl, John, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here.
Now, many of our listeners will already know or be familiar with you and your previous work, but could you briefly tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Yeah, an honor to be here.
Well, I'll start first. I got involved in Mormon history, 20 years ago, just dabbling in it. And I'm an independent researcher. I have my degree in physical education and recreation, and I've done, just for a job, I've done working with at the elderly in recreation and lifestyle. But my true love has been working with Mormon history. So I've done many articles that have been published in Mormon history journals, and I did a book with Nick Latursky and Joe Steve Swick III on Mormon Freemasonry. And I've also done a compilation of essays. I've drawn together a compilation of essays from different authors on polygamy called Secret Covenants.
So again, my name is John Dinger. I'm an attorney in Boise, Idaho. I got same kind of like Cheryl. I'm an independent historian as well. I got really interested in Mormon history and edited the Nauvoo High Council and City Council minutes, and then did another book on the changes to the Book of Mormon. And then same sort of thing. I've just been writing articles, working on other projects. Before I did this William Marks book. I also have a chapter in Cheryl's Secret Covenants book.
What
so we worked together
to dive into the research
a little bit as well there. And so
why William Marks?
Yeah, just a big fan who loves Mormon history, particularly Mormon legal history. Well, I came across William Marks through editing the Nauvoo High Council and City Council minutes. And so in there, you got to see a lot of the different personalities. Marks was a member of both groups, an important member of both groups. And as I read these sort of primary sources, they sort of told the story of Nauvoo, and William Marks really came out as somebody with a lot of integrity. Someone I didn't know a lot about, but was very, very impressed with how he handled himself in Nauvoo and the adversity near the end, and thought, I'd really like to read a biography of him, and there wasn't one. And so I sort of independently had been researching and working on him, had written a couple articles.
Yes,
and
I got
then,
interested in William Marks because he
COVID,
kind of popped up
Cheryl and I realized
everywhere
we
where I
both
was looking in Nauvoo,
kind of working on
but yet
him
there wasn't
and
a lot of
decided to
information
team
on
up.
him. So he would pop up here and there in the High Council minutes, or as stake president in Nauvoo, in the succession crisis, just many places you'd see his name, but you wouldn't hear very much about, or you wouldn't be able to find very much about him. So I thought, I wonder if there's anything more. And I did read John's articles as well, that he had written on William Marks. And I thought, wow, I bet it would be great to do some more research on him and get a book going. So as John said, we noticed that each other were working on the same thing. And I was originally, I was just going to back out of it, because I thought, oh, well, John's already done work on William Marks, so let him write the biography. But I was so grateful that he said, no, let's just collaborate on it. And that it has ended up being a wonderful collaboration. And I think the book is way better with both of us working on it than it would have been if either of us had done it on our own.
Can you tell us a little bit about the background of William Marks? I know that he comes from a Puritan background, and
I totally
I think
agree.
he is 1834 is when he joins the Restoration. Is that right?
Yes, interestingly, well, he had Puritan ancestors, but we were really lucky to find um, a source where we have William Marks in the Presbyterian Church. No one had found this before, but we found it on the Family History Library site. And it is a book of the Presbyterian Church in the area where William Marks lived. He and his wife were some of the founding members of that church. And it talks about his children being baptized into the church and a few things that he did while a member there. And then it outlines his excommunication when he met the Mormons. So that is a very fascinating story that no one has been able to bring out about him before. And it just adds that much more about his early life and what he was like before he joined the Mormons. And also, oh, so much fun to read about how, he was rejected by the Presbyterian elders for investigating this new church.
Anything stand out about his early involvement? I know that he was active in Kirtland, but as soon as he got in to the Restoration, he was active and involved in things. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think with that, he was just a very talented person. He was someone when they joined the church, immediately was able to help out with things, to lend his talents. So in Kirtland, he went in there and he started helping with business. He was added to the High Council and just really jumped in and was someone that Joseph Smith could count on. And I think a lot of that had to do with just kind of going back to your last question, what do we know about him before? He was a successful person. He was a business-minded person, and he was a bit older. So when he came in, I think he was someone, I think oftentimes when we are imagining church history, we don't imagine how young Joseph Smith was in the beginning, right? And the other church leaders. So to have William Marks, who was a bit older, he was probably very sort of calming and important influence. And so it kind of grew from there. He just
Yes, he was
showed
well established,
his
a little bit well off
talents in Kirtland, and
financially,
it
and
kind
had
of
some
springboarded
business
him
interests
into
that he
even
could
higher leadership
help
in
with
Nauvoo.
in Kirtland. So it's almost surprising how quickly he rose to leadership in Kirtland the minute he moved in. But Joseph Smith tended to do this, is identify people who could really help out and just give them leadership right away. And so he fit that mold.
Yeah, and he was involved in so many things. You talk about in the book how you can see kind of all of the Restoration history in Marx's life. With the Nauvoo High Council and the Nauvoo Legion and the aldermen, all these things that he was involved in. He really held a great amount of stature among the saints. But can you tell us, that continued with some folks after Joseph Smith's death, but for a lot of folks, he became, vilified. Can you tell us about that, about the succession crisis and William Marks's involvement in that?
Go on, John. You start. You start.
All right, I will. So one of the big things about William Marks and where he kind of gets into this succession crisis is he was probably the highest ranking non-polygamist in Nauvoo. And so that's really where it happened and where the controversy started. Because when Joseph Smith was killed, there were some people, including apostles, Emma Smith, who thought that he should become the leader of the church. And he never pushed for it. It appears he thought that Sidney Rigdon was the proper successor, at least he did in the beginning. And so when Sidney Rigdon and Brigham Young started contending, Marks tried to stay out of the fray, but would get sucked in. And that's where sort of this animosity started. The real thing, how I talked about before, how impressive he was to me, the thing that really stuck out to me and made me really like him was during the excommunication of Sidney Rigdon. It should have been a High Council hearing, but it was kind of taken over by the 12. It was sort of just a mishmash, weird sort of court process that we hadn't seen before. But in it, everybody started piling on Sidney Rigdon, and it wasn't being followed. The rules that were set up now in the Doctrine and Covenants weren't being followed. And so William Marks, knowing one of the rules is you have to have somebody speak on the behalf of the accused in an excommunication process, stood up and kind of said, I know this is going to go bad for me, but somebody has to follow the rules. Somebody has to speak for him. And he spoke in behalf of Rigdon. He sort of contradicted some of the things that the apostles said, and it didn't work. Rigdon was cut off. And then at the end, they kind of brought up, well, what do we do with William Marks? And they said we should keep him. But then after that, he started kind of dealing with harassment. Not kind of dealing, he was harassed. His things were stolen. He was threatened. And he was run out of Nauvoo. But it was because he was loyal to Joseph Smith and the revelations that he did that, and that's what happened to him. And so at the beginning, he could have been a contender if he pushed for it. There were those that supported him. Like I said, Emma Smith especially thought he should be the leader, but I don't think he ever believed he should. But he was very important. And then as far as, I'll just touch on it a little bit, but as far as the succession crisis that continued on, not just the Rigdon young one, or other groups.
So let me jump
really
in. Yeah, let me
him
jump in real
because
quick.
he led legitimacy
So
to
Brigham
their
Young
groups
and the
if he was to
12,
join
I
like
think, really
Strang and
did
Thompson
have to address
and that
William
type of
Marks
thing.
because
What I missed, sure.
in the Doctrine and Covenants, it talks about the 12 being a traveling high council. And so they had just jurisdiction over the parts of the church that were not in the immediate, the central, what's the word, John? um, uh, the, yeah, so he was the leader of the High Council in Zion, and so those are the people who that's where he had
The
actually
central stake.
jurisdiction over the church over Brigham Young. Although in the later days, the Council of the 12 did get a little bit more power under Joseph Smith, but yet we still have this Doctrine and Covenants that says that the Council of the High Council in Nauvoo is the one that should be leading over the church. So that's what happened when William Marks was over that High Council, as well as being the stake president in Nauvoo. And so Brigham Young really had to address him. How was he going to fit in if the 12 were going to take over the leadership of the church? So I think he didn't really know how to handle him because the 12 just kept on pushing Marks to declare his loyalty. And he did several times say, yes, I'm fine with you guys leading the church. He even signed a paper about it, but yet they just seemed to never really have that much faith that he was going to follow. And Brigham Young was very sensitive to the fact that he could have some pushback on his leadership. So they were not very kind to William Marks in the very last part of his stay in Nauvoo. Then they really just pushed him out. So later on as well, the church, the Mountain Saints, had to just kind of write him out of their history a little bit in order to really shore up the fact that Brigham and the 12 were the preferred successors. And so many times they would say that he was an apostate, or even some said that he was excommunicated, which never happened. He did not get excommunicated from the church, but there were many writings that sort of put him down as less than faithful.
Personally, I'm very interested in the divergent paths of the Restoration. And so the chapters on his involvement with Strang and Thompson were two of my favorite in the book. And he seems very attracted and driven by this idea of gathering. And, until, he finds out about Strang's involvement with polygamy, and then Thompson has, grabbed for more and more financial resources from the members. That kind of pushes him out. So he knows when to quit. He knows when to, when it's gone too far. But this idea of gathering really drives him. Can you tell us about that? I mean, you named the book,
Yeah.
about the idea of gathering, and so
Gathering is a large theme in the book. It's a huge thing in William Marks's life. He did gather to Kirtland. And then he gathered to Missouri very late in the day because he was helping people get over to Missouri, as he was working from Kirtland to help people get over. And so he was one of the later ones. And he arrived in Missouri almost to the day when they were kicked out. And then he was part of the council to decide whether they should buy up this land in commerce for the saints to gather. And this is interesting because most writers read this council meeting minutes as William Marks was not for gathering, but I read it as he was for gathering. He started out saying that he would like to see the saints gather. But then as the men started expressing their opinions, William Marks is usually a kind of a person that liked to take everyone's opinions and sort of balance and find a solution for everyone. And so he kind of withdrew, as I see it, he withdrew his opinion on wanting to gather. And so it ended up that this meeting, they did not come out strongly for gathering. But then Joseph Smith later, as he was able to be free from Liberty Jail, then did purchase that land and make sure the saints gathered. And then maybe John will talk a little bit about how he was involved with, or not involved so much in gathering with Strang's group.
Yeah, he was a gatherer at times and a reluctant gatherer at times, but it was always a theme throughout. I've always viewed him as the quintessential Kirtland Mormon. He loved the church in Kirtland. He had no problem gathering there. I see him as sort of a reluctant gatherer with Nauvoo, but did go there, but then was kind of burned by the Nauvoo experience. And so from then on, that's where you kind of see this reluctance, where these groups that he would go join with, like Thompson and Strang, really wanted him to gather. And he was kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out until he found his home again in the RLDS, or the Community of Christ. And then he was more than willing to gather again. And so it was a theme throughout. And I think not just in his life, but sort of the history of the Restoration, just we're gathering people, whatever branch we're with.
And the story is so interesting
Mark's,
as you read the biography with
seeing
Strang.
his life, you get to see
Strang
those
was a
gatherings
gatherer. He
and
wanted to
how
gather
he
to
viewed
Boree and
them
then
both
later to
positively and
Beaver Island.
negatively.
But as John mentioned, this was a time when Marks was a little bit hesitant. So he never went to Boree. He never went, he would go for the conferences, but he had a home in Shabona Grove, and he did not go to Boree. He did not go to Beaver Island. Then when he was on the outs with Strang, he joined the group under Charles Thompson. And Charles Thompson wanted to gather to a place, well, he didn't know where would be the best place for his group to gather, but he wanted to gather. So he made William Marks the head of a committee to go and find a gathering place. So I think Marks was more involved with Thompson's group in the gathering because they did find a place for the saints to gather. And they started, and Marks contributed to that. And what was he? Did he have a mill or something, or a lumber something where he was preparing for those saints to gather? Then the story is so interesting. When he went over there to start building a home for his family, he found problems, and that made him pull back. And that's when he pulled back from Thompson's group. then for a while he just wandered, and he wrote letters to friends that show that he really did have this desire to be around the rest of the saints, and that he was wondering, should I start something? Should I put my, energy behind someone else? Who is there? And so he was kind of wandering for a while before the restoration or the reorganization really got some steam, and he put through his energy behind them.
You mentioned letters, and one of the things that I really enjoyed in the book was his letters to his friend named Adams,
Mhm.
James Adams, yeah. And I'm curious, where did Marx keep a letter book or something? How did you get these letters that he had sent to Adams? And
James Adams. So this is sadly one of the big losses in our history is luckily excerpts of them have been published. So we do have some, and some a little more than excerpts. He wrote quite a few with James Adams, but they were destroyed in a
We do have
fire
some of the original
in the
letters,
Community of
and we
Christ
also have
archives
typescripts that were
years
made
and years
by
ago. So we don't have
one
many
of the
the
Community of
originals.
Christ historians. So we
But
do have those typescripts, which are really helpful for us. We also have a letter that Marx wrote to James Butterfield and Hiram Falk, and it was interesting because James Butterfield's son wrote a letter that's found in the Community of Christ archives that says, "Oh, we had this pile of letters from William Marx, and I saved this one, but the rest of them we burned." So we have it's so frustrating to see that William Marx apparently had written letters to a lot of people about his thoughts on the church. And so it's so fascinating that what don't we have? But the few letters that we do have do offer an insight into what he was thinking, and are very valuable. Were very valuable in writing this biography.
yeah,
And I think one of the values of the biography is we've included all his letters in an appendix.
he's
So
very
we
open
discuss
and
them in
vulnerable
context
at
throughout the
times
book, but they're there
Yes.
in
for
those
people to
letters.
read.
Yeah.
And they are just wonderful letters, kind of showing how he thinks, what he thinks about.
One of the things that I found about reading the
Yeah,
book
it talks about how
is
he's
how
felt
relatable
deceived and
William
needs to
Marx
slow down
seems.
and
Some of the
that
things
sort
that
of
he
thing.
writes to Adams, I can personally relate to some of those things, and so you tell a story of not only well documented history, but a really good story of a compelling character. So tell me some of your favorite William Marx stories, one or two that stand out.
Well, I already alluded to it, but the courage he showed in standing up regarding Sidney Rigdon at that just says volumes to me. I mean, I'm I'm a lawyer, so I'm a rule follower, right? We got to check those boxes, and he was a rule follower in a different way. The revelations of God and Joseph Smith, and so to see him do that was really amazing. I think the other story that I really like is after he had gone through, Strang and Thompson and was kind of on his own. He started meeting with those who were part of the reorganization, sort of the pre or LDS church, and he joined with them. He found a home with them, and they had been sort of without William Marx seeking out Joseph III to lead them. And it wasn't until William Marx joined that Joseph III started taking it more seriously. And so when Joseph III finally agreed to lead that group, it was William Marx that he wrote to. And so I think that shows what I think memories he must have had from from his youth of William Marks, but then
Yeah,
also
that's
what
what I
he's
was going to
likely
say.
heard
That's one of
from
my
his
favorite
mother
stories too, of how
growing
he
up
was
about William
involved in
Marks,
bringing Joseph Smith
that was
III into
a
the
real
reorganization.
factor of him
And
joining.
then he was one of the ones that they felt like William Marks had the proper priesthood authority, that he would ordain Joseph Smith III to his position as prophet and president of the church. So yeah, that's one of my favorite stories as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that when I was reading the chapter about his time with Strang, the Strang wanted him to seek out Joseph III too, right? I mean, that's
Well, Strang wanted him to take care of, the rest of the members of the family, like Lucy Max Smith, to bring her and make sure that she was okay, to bring William in, and yeah, he wanted Marx to bring the Smith family into his organization, which they actually did get involved very early in the Strang movement.
I'm always curious when you do this much research for a project, what are some of the more surprising things you found in your research?
Well, I have one that was a little surprising to me. So I noticed that one time when William Marks was going through a very difficult time because two of his young sons passed away when they were in Nauvoo. They were both teenagers, older teenagers, and one of the sons was with William as they petitioned for membership in the Masonic Lodge. And Joseph Smith preached at his funeral and was very sad about this young person dying. He was about the same age as Joseph's brother, Don Carlos. And so I think Joseph was really very, very sad about this situation. And then shortly thereafter, Sophia, William Marks's teenage daughter, who was 16, also became ill. And Joseph Smith went to their house to pray for Sophia, and showed quite a bit of attention to her. And we have three sources, some of them not so reliable. One is Joseph Johnson, who many people do not think or Jackson, was it Joseph Jackson, who many people do not think is reliable. But there are two other corroborating sources who say that Joseph was interested at that time in Sophia Marks as a plural wife. That was very surprising to me, and we're not quite sure how far to take that. But just these little hints are very interesting.
So Cheryl kind of stole mine. The big surprise for me was Sophia. It was interesting, this interest that Joseph showed in her. It was around the same time that he was showing interest in marrying similarly aged wives. And so we're responsible, but a little speculative on, I think we both believe that Joseph Smith likely would have wanted to marry her and make her a plural wife at the time. Other interesting things, I think, just coming from the LDS perspective, that's where I am. I didn't understand his importance and didn't understand how many of these saints who ended up with reorganization kind of did the same thing. We see these same names with William Marks, with the Strangites or with the Thompsonites, and just this body of people who truly loved Mormonism and couldn't countenance polygamy, but gathered together and eventually found a home in the RLDS Church. And so that was, as someone who wasn't as versed in RLDS or Community of Christ history,
and
that was something
I'm from
that I
the
really
same kind of
enjoyed
background, the LDS
learning
background.
about and
So
finding and
I
seeing
was
William
interested
Marks'
in
journey
all of the things I learned about William Marks after when he was Joseph Smith III's first and only counselor. In the first presidency, there were just William Marks and Joseph Smith III, and he was instrumental in getting the manuscript of the new translation of the scriptures from Emma Smith and and bringing it to the reorganized church so that they could have that as part of their scriptures. And that was really interesting to me.
You mentioned Sophia and the plural marriage a little bit. William Marks has kind of a complicated uh, relationship to the concept, as far as he seems to have knew about it, but rejected it, and then later he kind of tells different stories about it a little bit, it seems.
Yes, so William Marks was part of the High Council meeting in August of 1843 when Hiram Smith presented Doctrine and Covenants 132 to the High Council meeting. And William Marks was there. And apparently, from one of the accounts, the High Council was asked to sustain that revelation. And three men would not sustain it because they did not believe in plural marriage. And one of them was William Marks. The others were Austin Coles and Leonard Sobey. But William he never believed in polygamy. And we think that that's one of the reasons why Sophia then never became one of Joseph Smith's wives. He and his wife were very against plural marriage. And back then, John likes to say plural marriage wasn't the litmus test that it is now. So you could be someone who didn't believe in plural marriage and still be a well-respected leader of the church. So this was William Marks. And then he gives several testimonies later in his life about plural marriage in Nauvoo and his perspective. And the interesting one says that Joseph Smith kind of walked that back right before he was martyred. And that is such an interesting account. We do talk about that quite a bit in the biography, about this account that he gives and what it means and what it could mean. There are several ways you can interpret it. And so we like to be responsible. So we don't really take a strong stance on what we feel like, it means, but we give some possibilities.
He says that Joseph told him he was deceived, right?
Right. So William Marks said that he felt that he had been, or Joseph said he had felt that he had been deceived, and that he felt that if they continued the practice that they'd be kicked out of the United States. So he asked William to help him stop the practice and to go before the High Council and to tell people that if they did not stop, they'd be excommunicated. So this is one of the accounts. And then there are other accounts too that aren't so strongly, that maybe leave out that part about had been deceived. So there's several different ways that you can interpret it.
So, Jason, I do think that he had a very complicated relationship with polygamy. Like Cheryl said, he was there when the revelation was read to the High Council. And again, I view it as he had to accept some form of it to be a member of the Quorum of the Anointed. However, I think his form of it was how Hiram originally viewed it, which was something for the hereafter, like a spouse who had passed on. I don't think he ever accepted it as it was practiced in life. But he does give multiple versions throughout his life of this meeting that he had with Joseph Smith, but they're actually very consistent, I think. And they absolutely show, I think we're very good at showing that it happened. A lot of people, one of the questions, in fact, one of the few things people know about William Marks is this conversation. And the question I think Cheryl and I get a lot is, did this conversation with Joseph Smith happen? And I think we show it absolutely happened. I think there's some debate and people could do some work on, did Joseph Smith mean it? But that's different from did it happen? And I think in the book, we really show the context of this. We show that William Marks was on the grand jury at the time. And so that was the time when William and Wilson Law took a case of polygamy to the grand jury in Hancock County, dealing with the Lawrence sisters. And so William Marks was on the grand jury that heard that evidence, and Joseph Smith was indicted. And so we see this push and pull, this confusion, this complication in this relationship where he indicted Joseph Smith, but then he went on and put up bond for him. And then it was during that time where Joseph Smith had been indicted, where the 12 were all gone on missions campaigning for Joseph, that this conversation would have happened. And so it makes perfect sense in context that it would have happened. Again, I think the interesting question is, did Joseph mean it, or was he buying time for the 12 to get back? But I think those chapters on Nauvoo, late Nauvoo, that Cheryl and I write are those alone are worth the price of the book. And I hope that people really enjoy them and see that context of that statement and kind of how it developed. And
I always like to ask, you do a
was used
research
by
for a
groups and by
project like
people
this, and you find a lot
throughout
of
time. But
sources,
it's one of the most
and they
fascinating
lead you to
parts
more
of William
sources
Marks.
and more rabbit trails to go down. Um, what are some of the stumbling blocks that you came across? What are some of the things that you wish you could have dug into just a little bit more?
Yeah, we dug and tried to find every source we could, and I think we did pretty good. But like always, I'm happy if people have ones we missed, so we could learn more. What I think one of the stumbling blocks are we don't have a lot on his early life. He really picks up. We get some in Kirtland, and then we're pretty good from there. So Cheryl was the one that found the church records of him before he joined Mormonism, showed that he actually got excommunicated from his church there. And so that was fascinating. But I would love to find more about his early life, more about maybe his business dealings, landowning, that kind of stuff in New York. And then just in general, we have that great set of letters we kind of talked about that he writes as he's in between Josephs. But we don't always have his feelings on other points throughout his history as we get
Well,
in those letters.
I can
That's something
appreciate
that I
that, but I
wish
think you
we
both
had
did
more
a
of. We
great
could
job
really know how he
letting us into his
felt
mind a little
about the
bit.
events going on around him.
Is there something that you want people to take away from the story that that means a lot to you about William Marks?
Well, for me, it's I feel like the early church, in trying to defend the kingdom and in trying to take this little sect into the Mountain West and to strengthen it, somehow a lot of times left some of their members behind and did not include their stories in our early history. And so I think that from William Marks, we can see that someone that the Mountain Saints kind of lost along the way was someone that was really important to the restoration. And I think there were others as well. So if there's anything I'd like people to take from that is that, to dig into these other early members that we sort of have lost their stories, or we've put them as marked them as apostates and not wanting to know their stories. So, but their stories are very important to the restoration.
And I agree. That's the same kind of thing I was going to say. I am not Linda King Newell or Valine Tippett Avery. Cheryl's much closer to them than me. But when they wrote Mormon Enigma, they sort of rehabilitated, or not even rehabilitated, corrected the record to show that how great Emma Smith was. And so I kind of wanted to do the same thing with William Marks. I want my fellow Mountain Saints to think, boy, we blew it. I am jealous that he is not completely part of my tradition, that we blew it somewhere along the way. And so I think I just want to give him his due. I think he's an amazing early saint. He did amazing things, and I think that all branches need to respect that and learn more about him.
What should I have asked you about that I didn't?
Well, I think that you did ask about the gathering, and I think that's an important part of the book. And to see just the many manifestations of gathering over the different groups is really interesting. And William Marks is the person whose eyes we see that through. And so I hope that people get that out of the book as well, as that they can see what the gathering meant to Brigham, what the gathering meant to James Strang, Charles Thompson, the reorganization. So I think that that's a really valuable part of the book as well.
So I think there's a lot of stuff you could have asked us on, but this isn't an 8-hour podcast. And I think that's one of the big values of this book is there's so much there. He was involved in so many things. He owned the Kirtland Temple for a time. He helped build the city of Nauvoo. He was a judge on some of these habeas corpus cases with Joseph Smith. He was part of the trials of John C. Bennett. You could have asked us about the relationship with him and John C. Bennett. He really did not like Bennett. Once Bennett joined the Strangites, that's when Marks sort of cooled on the group and became less active. And so there's a million things you could have asked, but there's a million things you could have asked, and so you can't. And so I don't think you really missed anything. What I think are people just need to read this book and see that there is so much to the life of this wonderful man.
Yes, we also include some information on his role as a community leader in Shabona Grove. That was interesting too. It had nothing to do with Mormonism, but he was involved as a leader, and he was also respected as a leader in his community.
I highly recommend everyone to buy this book and read it. It's really a fantastic read, well documented, and tells a compelling story. What are you two working on next? Together or separately? What are your new projects?
Well, I like I said, I really enjoy legal history. I have been working, if you kind of look at what I've published, I've switched from Nauvoo type history to Idaho history where I live. I love Western Idaho history. I love legal history. And so I'm currently working on a book length project on the Idaho Test Oath in the 1880s when the Latter-day Saints were disenfranchised and couldn't vote. And so I argue that the cases and what happened in Idaho was more important to the ending of polygamy than what it's been given in the past. And so that's what I'm working on right now. I just had an article come out in the Utah State Historical Quarterly just this week on talking about the Idaho-Utah border and sort of the legal mess that led to, that some people ended up in prison, women lost, Idahoans lost the right to vote, some things like that. And so that's kind of where my focus is now, is out west.
You're so prolific, John. So for me, this is an interesting question because being a woman, I've not wanted to be known as a woman historian as opposed to just a Mormon historian. And so I've always kind of stayed away from like what's considered women's issues. I've never wanted to do a lot of work on polygamy or women's issues per se, but I keep getting dragged into them. So lately, I've been very involved in this idea of Joseph's involvement in restoring the practice of polygamy and actually living the practice of polygamy. And so that's been brought into question lately by some groups. And so I've been involved with that a lot. Right now, I'm working on a paper where Doctrine and Covenants 132 was presented, that revelation was presented to the High Council at Nauvoo. And so I'm studying that and the witnesses of that and how that stands up in history.
I'm excited to hear about both of these things. The last question I have, if people want to get in touch with you to learn more about the book or to learn more about your research, how can people do that?
I'm on all the normal social media, Facebook, Twitter, Threads. Just reach out to me in one of those ways, and I'd love to chat.
I am Instagram too. You can always find me on Facebook. I also have an academia site where you can see my work.
Okay, any final words you want to give our listeners?
No, I just want to tell you thank you for having us on, and I appreciated the kind things you said about the book, and I'm glad you liked it.
Thanks so much, Jason.
All right, thank you. We want to thank you for tuning in to the Whitmercast. John Whitmer Historical Association is an educational nonprofit institution. For more information, visit www.jwha.info, where you can meet our team and join the association, read past issues of the JWHA Journal, and get updates on upcoming conferences and events. Our theme music is I Love to Tell the Story, composed by Tom Moraine. This podcast is a production of John Whitmer Historical Association, all rights reserved.